Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff operations officer, assisted the national security team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the vice commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
Absolutely.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I don't think in terms of winning and losing. I think in terms of getting it settled so we stop killing all these people and breaking down and fighting. Now,
What do you, can I just follow up on that? You said you don't think in terms of winning and losing. Mr. President, can I just follow up on that because that's a really important statement that you just made there. Can you say if you want Ukraine or Russia to win this war?
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying, Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying. And I'll have that done. I'll have that done in 24 hours. I'll have it done. You need the power of the presidency to do it.
But you won't say that you want Ukraine to win. You
know what I'll say? I'll say this. I want Europe to put up more money because they're in for 20 billion. We're in for 170, and they should be. And they should equalize. They have plenty of money. They should equalize. I got with NATO.
But I'm asking
when I sat down, I got them to put up hundreds of billions of.
Trump can split the China-Russia alliance. Welcome to Training Tuesday. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, let me quote something here. The world is becoming increasingly dangerous and unstable due to America's failed strategy of global hegemony, which has been strongly supported by both neoconservative Republicans and neoliberal Democrats. This strategy has incited the formation of a hostile axis consisting of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. It has also left the U.S. military dangerously overextended and unable to deter aggression, leading to the outbreak of major wars in both Europe and the Middle East for the first time in half a century, close quote. Well, President Trump has promised, as you just heard, again, that he would end America's proxy war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office, declaring, and I quote, "We have to stop the killing in Ukraine," close quote. Well, my guest today is David Pine. He's a former U.S. Army Combat Arms and Headquarters Staff Officer who was in charge of armaments cooperation with the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas from 2000 to 2003. He's got an MA in National Security Studies from Georgetown University, and he currently serves as Executive Vice President of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security and is a member of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, of which I'm a colleague of his on that committee. Today, we're discussing his recent article laying out a proposed peace plan with Russia, which could, in fact, do what I said at the beginning, split the alliance between Russia and China. David, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Thanks so much, Rob. It's an honor to be back on your show.
Well, we've got a lot going on, you know, and the clip I just showed is from some months ago. Can you help us set the table here on where we're at now that the GOP convention's over, President Trump's the actual nominee, we're post this assassination attempt that occurred, and Iran is on the brink of some type of major retaliatory response against Israel, and the war continues in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, the world is on fire. It really is. I mean, since Biden became president, it's been one geopolitical disaster to another, starting, of course, with Afghanistan in 2001. Unlike most other analysts, I don't believe that has any connection to Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. I think if we were still in Afghanistan, Putin most assuredly would have still invaded Ukraine under the same circumstances, which are that Biden denied his offer to guarantee that Russia wouldn't invade in the case that we guaranteed Ukraine would never become a NATO member state. But this is a war that's been going on for 2.5 years now. We now have a war in the Middle East that threatens to become a full-scale regional war between Iran and Israel. As we've discussed, I think maybe both of us believe that Iran is a nuclear power and has minimum nuclear IRBMs, perhaps even the capability to deploy, or already have deployed, as Dr. Peter Pry and I assessed, our late executive director of the Task Force on National Homeland Security, that Iran likely has super EMP satellites already in orbit over the U.S. that could destroy the U.S. in a moment's notice. And I've assessed that Russia likely does as well. There's been that story that was leaked from the House Intel Committee that Russia in fact had imminent plans to deploy nuclear satellites in space, which turned out to be super EMP weapons. And although U.S. intelligence has not conceded they are already deployed, there's been some evidence that they may already be deployed. And so this latest peace proposal that was submitted by Chet Nagel and I, our other fellow member of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, and a legendary, Cuban Missile Crisis vet and U.S. Navy pilot, among other things. We wanted to kind of fill in the gap in terms of what Trump's plan should be in terms of specific details to end the war in 24 hours. And I think that this plan, it's pretty simple, just 8 points, would accomplish that.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. One of the questions I had before we dive too far into it, do you have a sense amongst your colleagues that you may still be in contact with in the national security community that are in the government as to why the president or his team, let's say his team, is so belligerent and opposed to at least starting a peace talk process with Russia over Ukraine?
Well, it has to do with President Joe Biden's idea that the U.S. is kind of the global hegemon, and therefore we have no equals. And if anyone crosses us, we may choose not to throw a diplomatic temper tantrum and refuse to talk to them. But it goes against every lesson of the Cold War. Cold War history in terms of keeping, the kind of the rules of the road for how to keep the great power nuclear peace that JFK instructed us so well on with his decision to resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis with a diplomatic agreement in which the U.S. actually gave more to the Soviets than we gave to them, and we did that from a position of strength. Churchill famously said that appeasement's bad unless we do it from a position of strength. And that was almost kind of the case with JFK. We actually had 5 to 9 times more strategic nuclear weapons than the Soviets at that time. But he was very headstrong and determined to spare the lives of the estimated 100 million Americans that would die in a nuclear war with the Soviets. It could have been much less. It could have been 15 million. But in any case, it would have been a devastating war. One I think we would have been guaranteed to win, I might add. But still, he didn't want to risk the lives of tens of millions of Americans to die in an unnecessary nuclear war. And today, with Ukraine, it's almost like a kind of a Cuban Missile Crisis redux, because the reason for this, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, was to essentially prevent nuclear-capable delivery systems such as B-52s from being positioned or based out of Ukraine. And until we acknowledge that existential threat to the perceived existential threat to Russia and agree to do something about it, the war will continue indefinitely. But it's been completely nonsensical that Biden has refused to even talk with the Russians. I mean, minimally, all he would have to do is send a low-level delegation, perhaps headed by a deputy secretary of state, and simply say, these are our terms. We want you guys out. Just start a dialogue, and maybe we're far apart, and then we just start giving mutual concessions until we find agreement.
Yeah, there's not. Vladimir Putin has made comments since 2022. about potential peace progress or potential peace agreements. There's been talks that have occurred outside of the United States and NATO being part of them. The one in Turkey, if I remember correctly, and as recently as July of this year, he's kept the door open. The door's not closed. It's certainly not closed and locked to initiating peace talks. It's just puzzling when you see them behave one way in the Middle East by insisting on a nonsensical ceasefire that Israel get into with Hamas, when they know that that situation is completely different than the one in Ukraine, Russia, where it's possible, and it's not going to be possible until Hamas is completely gone from the perspective of being able to attack Israel, in my opinion, anyway. But on this side, no, we're not going to do that. It's very, very interesting. So let's talk about let's start working through the points of the plan, David. Let's just do it in sequence from step one.
Well, I don't have a copy in front of me, but yeah, essentially what it is that the first plank is essentially a huge concession that Russia would make to us, in which we would commit to never allow Ukraine to join NATO, and Ukraine would commit to the same, in exchange for Ukraine becoming essentially a major non-NATO ally. And that's a designation the U.S. has given to a number of countries, pretty much out-of-area countries, Brazil, Argentina, maybe Japan, Kuwait, countries like that. So it's a step down from NATO membership. But, I think we can all concede that NATO membership should be off the table. I mean, heck, Blinken and other U.S. officials behind the scenes, French President Macron have quoted, them as saying, the U.S. is one of two countries in NATO, two major countries, that adamantly refuses Ukrainian NATO membership. So it's ironic that the U.S., leaders behind the scenes are telling, President Macron and other NATO leaders that under no circumstances are we going to allow Ukraine to join NATO in the near future, and yet we won't concede the same thing to Russia, when that would be the greatest initial step to get us, halfway to a peace deal. And I've explained the reasons for that in some of my previous writings. But then there's also, of course, disarmament provisions. Russia, there was a leaked documents the New York Times provided on June 15th when I published a previous peace proposal, in which it stated the exact terms that Ukraine and Russia had agreed to, and those they were still a little bit far apart on. One of those was the ranges of Ukrainian strike systems. Russia was insisting on, I think, 40 kilometers max range, and as well as the number of Ukrainian weapons systems that would be allowed in terms of tanks, armored combat vehicles, various missiles, etc. So I think the limitations that we provided, essentially it would be the limitations not in terms of range, but in terms of numbers of systems, with the exception of armored vehicles. The German army, the current armaments of the German army essentially fall within Russia's requested limitations. So, there were concerns raised at the time when U.S. intelligence got wind of these estimates and demands from Russia that this would essentially amount to unilateral disarmament. But we're not talking about a military that's disarmed to kind of Versailles Treaty levels for the German army. In terms of size, it might be comparable, but Ukraine's a lot smaller and less populated country. But in terms of weapon systems, it would essentially be the full range of weapon systems, and again, at the sizes or the quantities rather for the German military. And then, there were a couple agreements, a couple of planks at the end that essentially helped to establish kind of a Russo-American entente, is what Chet and I have referred to it as, which would essentially make, it's kind of modeled on the Anglo-French entente of 1904, which led to a military alliance. We're not saying that we want to be military allies with Russia against China. That's that is likely outside the range of possibility. So we don't think that should be considered at this time, but rather some kind of entente, essentially a sphere of influence agreement, an agreement that we don't want any conflicts at all. We'll resolve them all peaceably, and these are kind of the limitations. This region will be kind of out. There'll be no foreign interference in the area of the former Soviet Union, for example, outside the Baltic states, and of course Ukraine, and perhaps Moldova. But and then Russia in turn would commit not to interfere in the Western Hemisphere in terms of Cuba. Military aid to Cuba, military bases, troops, spy bases, all of that. Venezuela and Nicaragua.
Well, we've got some people and nations in our sphere of influence, like Viktor Orban of Hungary, and we'll hear from him when we come back from this break in a little short clip about peace between Russia and Ukraine. And he just became the EU president, I think. There's not a whole lot of power in it, but he does have the bully pulpit. And we'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast with David Pine. We're talking peace between Russia and Ukraine, split the Russia-China alliance, and that Donald Trump could get it done. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last 2 times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHouseBG.com.
If you were in charge of NATO, if you were, say, Joe Biden, what would your next move be in the war in Ukraine?
Peace, immediately. Call back Trump. That's the only way out. The best foreign policy of the recent several decades belonged to him. He did not initiate any new war.
Yes.
He treated nicely the North Koreans and Russia, even the Chinese, He delivered a policy which was the best one for Middle East, Abraham Accords.
Yes.
So that was a very good foreign policy. He's criticized that he's not educated enough to understand the world. But this is not the case. Facts counts. And his foreign policy was the best one for the world in the last several decades I have seen. And if he would have been the president at the moment of the Russian invasion started, no, it would be not possible to do that by the Russians. So Trump is the man who can save the Western world and probably the human beings in the globe as well.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. We're live here on Worldview Tube and X Spaces simulcast, and it's Training Tuesday, and we're discussing an 8-point peace plan between Russia and Ukraine. It would be supported by the United States to help fulfill President Trump's campaign statement that he could end this war and wants to end this war and could do it within 24 hours. And David Pine is my guest today, one of the authors of this peace plan. David, obviously that was Viktor Orban there, the president of Hungary, and now the EU president, with that country's turn in the barrel, so to speak, in that organization. And part of your plan is that the Ukraine recognizes the Russian control over the current territories, like Donetsk and Luhansk and Kherson, those areas that it already controls. But you basically stabilize those lines and initiate a DMZ of about 4 kilometers wide there, observed by either the UN or the OSCE. Could you envision a role for Orban to play in this process since he's pro-peace?
Well, I would love to have him help mediate this peace agreement. One of the things that people don't realize, I think, about how to come to peace. It's really not between Zelensky and Putin so much, although we came very close to that with the Istanbul Agreement. It would most quickly be achieved in a summit between President Trump and President Putin. Obviously, President Biden's never going to meet with Putin, but President Trump, I think, would be happy to meet with Putin to get this peace deal done, to bring an end to the death and destruction in this war, and to achieve essentially what President Woodrow Wilson described in January 1917 as a peace without victory, without victors, essentially. Each side has to have give and take. Russia, of course, would have accomplished a lot of the objectives of its so-called special military operation. Ukraine would remain in the U.S. Orbit as a U.S. military ally, albeit with no NATO troops inside of Ukraine. And that was kind of the situation that we had with, the former Warsaw Pact nations that began joining NATO in 1999. And yet we didn't see any NATO troops in Eastern Europe at all until 2016, following the July 2016 Warsaw Summit on the decision of President Obama. So really, that's what the objectives of the Russian invasion of Ukraine are twofold. Essentially, to restore Ukrainian neutrality, which admittedly this peace plan would not do. I think that's something that Russia would be willing to concede if we agreed to everything else, essentially, that they've been requesting. And by the way, the reason I left that in there, non-NATO, major non-NATO ally status, is not because I don't think we shouldn't do neutrality. I think we should. It's to make it more palatable and more acceptable to the Biden neoliberals and the Republican neoconservatives, because essentially it has to be minimally acceptable to everyone. And so the idea behind it is, even we know that there were neoconservatives in the Trump administration during his first term, and we might assume that there might be a few in this one as well. We don't want anyone to kind of talk him out of a good deal like this. But essentially would be to get back to the pre-Maidan coup, neutrality, which would have been, pre-February 2014, and then to the pre-Warsaw Pact status, or rather the Warsaw Summit of July 2016 in Eastern Europe, where there were no Western troops at all. And if you go back and read Russia's December 2021 proposed draft mutual security agreement, that's one of the key provisions, is that he's not asking for NATO's boundaries to be rolled back by even 1 square inch. He accepts the inclusion of the Baltic states, for example, in NATO on a permanent basis. But he's asking for Western troops, which he describes as allied troops, to be withdrawn from that region. We only have 20,000 troops in Eastern Europe, so it's not really a big ask in terms of, from our perspective, I believe. And then it also includes a couple of other provisions that I think are important. Increasing the cap on nuclear arms from 1,500 new start to 3,500, which is kind of a level that would give us a much more robust deterrent against China, because we know that China will never agree to any limits. As well as some confidence building measures, such as not allowing surface ships, surface warships, or nuclear strategic bombers within a 200-mile radius of each other's territory. And that would only apply to the U.S. and Russia, by the way. So we could see Japanese and non-U.S. NATO warships coming close to Russia, but not U.S. warships. And that gives us a benefit as well, because we know that the joint Russian and Chinese nuclear bomber patrol that had never happened before, was intercepted 200 miles from Alaska. So that would give us kind of a protective range of our own, at least for Russian bombers and ships. They wouldn't be allowed to be exercised right off our coast, as was the case with the Cuban flotilla, where they were actually conducting nuclear warfare exercises just 66 miles off our coast. So I think there's much, yeah, there's a lot of good from a strategic perspective that we could gain, and we could do so in a way that would establish, kind of a new entente with Russia that would essentially allow us to pivot against China, while at the same time neutralizing the Sino-Russian alliance that poses this massive existential threat we've never faced before in our history.
Yeah, all very, very interesting proposals, really. I mean, I think it's unique in those kind of things. Well, let's go over to the audience and take a question. I think we've got a hand up over there. Shell's our host still. Shell, who's got the hand up?
George, sir. George.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your welcoming to your space. Thank you for your service, gentlemen. I think we're past that point of your observations, because Ukraine does not want to give up anything more than they've already done. They gave up their nukes. They trusted NATO, the West, to protect them. They still got invaded. And I would say that their resolve, including with some of the responses like Poland and some of the surrounding countries, I think they're fully prepared to take Russia on. And
sir, do you have a question for the Colonel and his guest?
We should probably back them. What do you think is that the end state with the current things that are going on? Ukraine has invaded Russia now.
That's a good question. Go ahead, David.
Well, in terms of the Ukrainian invasion of Russia, it's really a propaganda offensive. I mean, granted, there are two to three brigades involved with some supporting brigades as well. But the number of troops, as well as the amount of territory occupied, it's very minimal. It's actually, for me, it's, I've kind of made comparisons, as our colleague Stephen Bryan has made, to the Battle of the Bulge. But of course, it's much less than that. It's more akin, I think, to the French Saarland offensive against Nazi Germany in September 1939, in that, it's only penetrated 7.4 miles into Russian territory. So, I think what the Western press, what we call the regime media, has really played up this offensive into much more than it is. It's a border incursion, certainly, and it's a border incursion for us. It's not merely a raid. They are holding some territory, but it's very temporary. I'm a supporter. I consider myself a supporter of Ukraine. I want to, just like Trump, I want to limit, end the death and destruction of Ukraine. I want to start the rebuilding process. I want to, ensure Ukraine's independence and security. But we have to be realistic. There is no prospect of Russia giving up any of the annexed territories that it annexed in September 2022. So it has to be, as the Russians have stated, it has to be realistic terms. And the realistic terms mean that, Ukraine doesn't have to cede any more territory, not a single square inch of additional territory to Russia. But it has to recognize continued de facto Russian control over what they would describe as the occupied territories.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you, David. It's more of a propaganda operation. Now the writings of those senior military folks in the West, especially Americans, have been along the same theme, which is, hey, look, the Ukrainians were able to achieve strategic surprise in this operation. But anything beyond that, not even the biggest pro-war people are saying that this is a huge victory or invasion or any of those types of words. So, the interesting thing to me was when I saw this was, are they expecting Russia to need to move forces out of the front where they make small gains, I think, every day now, and redirect them over in that direction? Because the Russian forces are just so much larger and have so much more manpower pool available. They don't really need to do that, do they?
They don't, yeah. And if you read Ukraine's top general, he had a recent assessment that was, positively spun by regime media. But essentially, what it said is Russia invaded with only 100,000 troops. They currently have, I think he estimated like 530,000 troops. and they were building up to 690,000 troops. So by Ukraine's top general's estimation, Russia is increasing the size of its troops inside of Ukraine by nearly 7 times. And at the same time, Ukraine has lost, by my estimation, nearly 1 million troops in terms of killed and wounded in action. And where I get those numbers, it was 1.3 million, according to the previous head of, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military, that was the number of troops that Ukraine was fielding in November of 2022. And then recently, Zelensky himself, I think, stated only 500,000. And then since then, there's been a high-level, former administration official that was saying it's 300,000. So that's 1 million killed and wounded. Now, granted, they're reportedly mobilizing about 30,000 additional troops per month. But even that number is, with the new mobilization plan, is less than it's less than they're losing. So they're not replacing them man for man. Every month, their total force is being reduced, and by the end of the year, they may not have enough troops to man the front, and then Russian troops will be able to just push through all the way to the Dnipro River, and perhaps even to re-surround or partially surround Kyiv through Belarus.
Yeah, I want to talk about that more in the context of the peace plan proposal after this break here, because I'm with you. I mean, they're losing so many people, and and the mobilization is now focused on an average age of 45-year-olds. I think it's gone up 5 years since the last time somebody assessed it. That tells me that as much as they may want to recapture all of their territory, what's the art of the possible? And we'll talk about that when we get back here on the Worldview Tube on the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday. Former Army officer David Pine is with us, talking about achieving peace between Ukraine and Russia, and maybe splitting that Sino-Russian alliance up and getting things adjusted back to a place where we can have a world that's safe and we're not all killing each other by the hundreds of thousands. We'll be right back.
And we have a corrupt, compromised president, crooked Joe Biden, who is dragging us into World War III. And that's what's happening on behalf of a nation that paid his family millions and millions of dollars in obvious bribes. All you have to do is take a look at how much China, how much Ukraine have paid the Biden family. It's a total disgrace and a very dangerous one. Under these circumstances, the notion that we would even consider admitting Ukraine into NATO at this time is completely unhinged. Joe Biden can't even walk up a flight of stairs on Air Force One, and he can't put 2 sentences together. The last thing that this incompetent administration should be doing is risking war with a nuclear-armed Russia or China or other countries. We have somebody that doesn't have a clue representing us.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday, and peace between Russia and Ukraine. That is a top goal of the man that's the GOP nominee. You just heard him there, former President Donald J. Trump, for the presidency here in 2024. And he thinks he can get it done very rapidly. He's used the time frame of 24 hours. And you know what? If any other politician had made that statement, I would write it off as hyperbolic rhetoric in the middle of a campaign. But I don't write it off with this man, because he did things in his first administration that surprised me, and I thought I was somebody that was thinking out ahead and thinking we could get some things done that a lot of people said couldn't be done. But Trump did what I was talking about, and increase that even in size and in rapidity. And we're talking with my guest David Pine today about his and his colleagues' proposal with an 8-point peace plan between Russia and Ukraine that could help the president get this done. And David, one of the things that is specifically you talk about in the plan is the issue of nuclear weapons. I'll just characterize them for the audience's sake as tactical nuclear weapons. There are B-61 gravity bombs that NATO and the West have in Europe. And then, of course, Belarus now has Russian nuclear weapons that they've recently put back in place during the Ukraine-Russian war. How would that work with the moves that you propose, this plank of this plan, so that everybody is confident that no one will be able to pop one of these off by surprise?
Yeah, well, the whole point of this agreement is to essentially end the second Cold War with Russia. It's to eliminate the Russian threat to NATO entirely by making Russia a strategic partner along the lines that we initially thought of making Russia. You know, and Russia, of course, Putin offered to join NATO in 2000 and 2002. We know that Gorbachev wanted the Soviet Union to join NATO in 1990, and Yeltsin in 1991 with the Russian Federation. So we had this great missed opportunity that we had to incorporate Russia into the Western security architecture of Europe. But in terms of nuclear weapons, you know, with the end of a Cold War with Russia, there would be no purpose to have these 150 nuclear gravity bombs. You know, they're really quite obsolescent. And easily destroyed with Russian hypersonic missiles in a first strike in the event war were to break out. They could take them out, certainly with low-yield nuclear weapons on atop hypersonic missiles. But where we really need nuclear weapons is to deter communist China. You know, communist China, I assess, is likely to blockade and perhaps invade Taiwan as early as October, just 2 months away. Following the 75th anniversary celebrations of the People's Republic of China, set to take place first week of October this year. So that is a tremendous threat, and China essentially enjoys a virtual monopoly over the U.S. in terms of non-theater or rather non-strategic nuclear weapons in East Asia and the Western Pacific. They have at least hundreds of non-strategic nuclear weapons that they've deployed. They have, over 1,000 hypersonic missiles. They could take out our bases in the region very quickly with, these nuclear hypersonic missiles. They could take out our carrier battle groups. And the U.S. has 0 nuclear weapons deployed on its ships outside of our boomer submarines, our nuclear ballistic missile submarines that have strategic nuclear missiles. And while it's true that we do have, Trump developed, some 5 kiloton warheads to deploy on those missiles, we only have 8 to 32 total. So would likely have, at most a dozen, probably 10 to 12 at most, deployed in the Pacific at any given time. And if we were to launch a Trident II from from one of our Ohio ballistic missile submarines, I can guarantee you that China would assume that was a nuclear first strike on the Chinese homeland and would respond in kind with multiple launches of strategic nuclear missiles at the U.S. homeland. So that's really not an option. I mean, that's really a worst case scenario is a way to accelerate directly to a full scale nuclear exchange. That would include likely a super EMP attack as well as from Chinese satellites, orbital nukes perhaps used in a decapitation strike to, as we've discussed, to take out either 2 or possibly even all 3 nuclear footballs at the same time, leaving the U.S. unable to launch a retaliatory strike with the new acting president in at least 24 hours, perhaps even a matter of days. So these are critical deficiencies that we have, and we have the nuclear weapons in place to redeploy to that region. We could deploy these gravity bombs on, our aircraft carriers, on our Lightning carriers as well. So we'd have multiple platforms, and then I'm also advocating that we take 150 of our ALCM warheads and deploy them on sea-launched Tomahawk missiles, so that we could have another 150 nukes deployed on our surface ships and attack submarines. So what we need to do is we need to renuclearize our Navy. We need to renuclearize our forces in the Western Pacific. And I'm not advocating war with China over Taiwan by any means. In fact, I think we should go, take great pains to avoid that. And I think President Trump would agree with me on that point. But we need to restore deterrence. We've lost deterrence. Obviously, with these two wars, one in the Middle East and one in Europe, that we haven't seen for half a century, we're not successfully deterring our enemies, and that needs to change.
Yeah, and we've changed some of our boomer submarines over into these guided missile submarine launchers that can launch the TLAM Tomahawk land attack missiles in much greater numbers than the ships, the surface ships do. That's an idea to be able to reorient those TLAMs to use nuclear warheads if necessary, and add that to the basket of risk assessment if a Chinese or a Russian preemptive strike was being contemplated. It needs to be out there, but how do you answer NATO's question? Because one of the big NATO questions, I can hear it now, is you're removing our nuclear umbrella and our ability to respond if we're attacked in the nuclear realm. What do you say to them in that discussion?
I would say Britain and France have 515 nuclear weapons that are intermediate range that have, the ability to strike Western Russia or, Russian forces if they invade. So those could assume the tactical role, the non-strategic role for NATO's nuclear deterrent, and then the U.S. would maintain its strategic nuclear umbrella over NATO. So in the event Russia were to attack, I wouldn't say that we should escalate to nuclear war over the Baltic states, for example. But if they were to head to Germany or their Central Europe, we could certainly consider using nuclear weapons to disrupt and destroy their offensive operations. But again, I think that as you well know, as someone who served in very high capacities in terms of developing our first theater nuclear war plan, threat is measured in terms of both capabilities and intent. And Russia's all these.
I think I lost you there for a second, David. Are you with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. These types of plans and operations are measured by capability and intent and political will. Until the United States actually shows that it has the political will by moving capability to the right place on the globe, to try to deter China, we're going to continue to remain in this specific situation, I think. So I like the idea of shifting resources and using existing resources, and it kind of puts the ball, and I'll just say this before we go to the last break, it puts the ball back on the court of Europe when it comes to the defense of Europe. And that the president and those of us that are in what I would call the realist national security strategy basket, you, me, Colby, among others, have been talking about this and reprioritizing that. And we'll talk about that some more and hear from Vladimir Putin about Trump when we come back from this break.
Well, you know, the fact that Mr. Trump, as a presidential candidate, says that he's ready and wants to stop the war in Ukraine, we take that very seriously. Well, I haven't seen his ideas on how exactly he's going to do that, and that is the key question. But I have no doubt that he says that sincerely, and we support that.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday. We're talking about peace between Russia and Ukraine and the possibility of a plan that needs to be out there and is out there, and there may be more plans, but my guest is David Pine. He's one of the gentlemen that wrote this particular plan we're talking about, and that was Vladimir Putin speaking there, David. And that was not long ago. That was the 4th of July when Mr. Putin was talking about President Trump's sincerity in wanting to end the war, and that they take that very seriously. So, as I said at the beginning of this program, the door is open to an approach to get this settled and reestablish peace on the continent in Eastern Europe, and to reestablish some deterrent. And I think what we see, you and I both probably agree on this, and it'll be okay if you don't, but we see a tripolar world emerging. When I say that, I mean three co-equal nuclear powers with very high-tech and large numbers of conventional forces capable of operating at will anywhere around the world. And I'm saying emerging at this point because I don't even think the United States is capable of operating at will anywhere around the world these days, especially from a conventional perspective. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's completely true. You know, that those statements were made at the SCO summit, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit. That's really one of essentially the Sino-Russian military alliance. It's a security alliance, admittedly. It's an economic alliance. And it really, you know, in terms of aggregate power, in terms of economic power, industrial power, manpower, you know, having 43% of the world's population, 31% of the world's GDP, I would assess over 80% of the world's nuclear weapons. I mean, this is the world's greatest alliance. And, you know, granted, we still live in kind of a U.S.-led international order, liberal international order. But that's you know, that needs to be adjusted a bit. And I'm not someone who's advocating for us to give up our treaty allies. I think we should defend our treaty allies. We should keep our nuclear guarantees. You know, maybe with a little adjustment in Eastern Europe, but that's not necessary to accomplish the plan that we're discussing today. But you know, we can't. I think we have to find compromises on when it comes to nuclear red lines for Russia over Ukraine and perhaps China over with Taiwan as well. And I have a different peace proposal over that you might find a little bit more controversial, but one that would ensure Taiwan's continued self-rule and you know, and retain control of its armed forces. So you know, I think that we have to have this imaginative thinking if we're to avoid a nuclear holocaust with Russia and China that perhaps, you know, would include a super EMP attack that could destroy our civilization. And when I say destroy our country and civilization, I'm not talking about, you know, like what we did to Germany, cutting up into little pieces and, you know, killing off, you know, whatever 14 million of its people. I'm talking about a Holocaust that we've never seen before, with 80 to 90% of our population destroyed, maybe 250 million Americans killed over a period of a year. That could happen. That's what I call China's Plan B. You know, their Plan A is to pursue, you know, economic hegemony over the world peacefully, transforming the U.S. slowly into almost a Chinese colony in terms of, you know, a third world economy that supplies, you know, raw materials and whatnot to them, so they can give us manufacturing goods where they have elite capture, taking over our leaders, essentially buying them off, as in the case of Joe Biden and apparently the new Democrat vice presidential nominee Tim Walz as well. in terms of brainwashing him, almost as if he's a Manchurian vice president. That I wrote another article about it on my Substack.
We have many conversations to have about Tim Walz over the next few months, my friend, for sure. Well, let's go over to the audience. We've got a hand up over there and take one more question before we get to the end of the show. But I want to continue this discussion about China and what it will take for the United States actions to try to get this world back on an even keel so that we're in a deterrence mode instead of an endless war mode. Go ahead, Shell, with the question.
Go ahead, Michael.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. I hope you guys can hear me fine. Had some mic issues coming in here. I wanted to talk about hypersonic weapons and nuclear parity. I guess that's probably the right word I'm looking for. We go tit for tat. Vladimir Putin warned us against overdeveloping our missile defense systems. His answer was hypersonic weapons. Is there a point in development of nuclear missile systems and hypersonics where first strike capability is developed and we don't have an answer for it? Is there like an end-all be-all past that? I know Truman, back in the Truman years, there was a plan in place to just kind of wipe everything out and start again in 300 years. Is that something still on the table? Thank you.
It's a good question about the hypersonics and merger of nuclear and hypersonics, and then what is our answer to that?
Well, I think a lot of people have this misconception that if one nuclear weapon is used, then it's automatically going to escalate to a full-scale nuclear exchange. I think it's much more likely that if Russia or China were to use nuclear weapons in a limited way against our allies or even against our overseas military bases, I think there would be a call for de-escalation to see if we could, avoid a nuclear exchange that could escalate to a full-scale nuclear war. That's not something I think U.S. leaders like to discuss, but it may be that escalate to de-escalate. The Russian doctrine and probably the Chinese version as well might be more effective than we'd like to admit. But certainly, the Russians have, really been building up their nuclear arsenal to an extent that has really not been adequately reported on. They built it up to a much larger extent than the Chinese have to date, although I assess that China likely has, far more nuclear weapons than we have at this point, probably 2.5 times more operational nuclear weapons. But Russia, according to a recently disclosed Ukrainian defense report, has as many as 16,000 nuclear weapons. The U.S. currently has no more than about 2,000 or 2,100 nuclear weapons, including readily available operational weapons that are deployed, as well as active reserve weapons in the hedge that could be quickly redeployed to operational service. So that's an 8-to-1 disadvantage, assuming that's true. Even if it's only 8,000, as previous reports had indicated, then that's still 4-to-1. And then, again, China has if you add 4,000, 5,000 warheads to 8,000 or even 16,000 on the Russian side, we're talking up to 10 times more ready to fire, strategic nuclear warheads on the enemy side than we have on our own side. So it's, nuclear parity we haven't had nuclear parity. We had kind of rough nuclear parity at the end of the Cold War, but a lot of people don't realize we were outnumbered 2-to-1 in terms of total warheads. We found out after the Cold War ended, Russia had 44,000 nuclear warheads, whereas we had built down to 22,000. 22,000 was more than enough. We didn't need to match Russia's nuclear arsenal warhead for warhead. And it turned out that having a 2-to-1 disadvantage in total warheads, but a rough strategic parity, where the Russians had only slight nuclear superiority over us at the strategic level, turned out to be sufficient to win the Cold War. We're much more outmoded this time, so we can't assume that having 10 times less ready to fire strategic nuclear warheads will be sufficient to deter, let alone win, a shooting war with Russia and China.
There are some new ideas out there that have been recently published. One calls to achieve nuclear parity with a realistic assessment of China's capability combined with Russia's. That would require an extensive build out and increase in defense spending on our part. And the other piece that needs to be added to that is this nuclear hypersonic weapon system capability that do we have a defense against that at this point?
Well, we don't, and one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is none of the U.S. hypersonic missile systems are nuclear. They're not designed to be nuclear capable. They are in fact nuclear capable. We could transform them to be nuclear capable within some number of months or years, but none of them are being employed with nuclear weapons. But in terms of our defense capabilities against hypersonic weapons, it's much more limited because, of course, ballistic missiles are all hypersonic in terms of long-range IRBMs and ICBMs. But hypersonic cruise missiles travel at a much more depressed trajectory, making it far more difficult to intercept them or even to have warning of them in some cases, making, Putin's 2022 threat to use Zircon hypersonic missiles to decapitate the U.S. and take out Biden before he got on Air Force One much more credible and dangerous, I think.
Absolutely. Well, I have one more question, David. I think I know the answer, but hey, I got to ask it anyway. Have you had an opportunity to brief the president or his team on this plan at this point? Or do you have a plan to do that?
Yeah, I've been trying to develop contacts with his national security circle, and I've met with only very limited success thus far. So perhaps we can talk offline and see if we have any contacts. I'm thinking maybe General Flynn might be the next person to work with to try to get an audience with the president, or simply to share my peace plans. Chet and I's peace plan with his inner circle.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time to come on and talk about this plan. It's very interesting. It's doable, and it's realistic. And I think that's the bottom line here: is we have to be realistic in what we're trying to achieve, and do it in the interest of the United States, and then everything else can fall into place around it. David Pine, folks, you can find him out there on Twitter. Just type in his name, Google him. He's out there. We've had his website and X handle up here the entire time that he's been on the show. And tomorrow we will be talking with Robert Spencer. And he has a new book out, but he's also got a new article out about Tim Walz. And I'll just say it this way. Walz has a love affair with the Hamas Nazis. And that is going to be a great show, too. We'll see you tomorrow on Worldview Tube and X Spaces simulcast here at the Rob Maness Show.